It's time for Deploy on Friday for Friday, April 21st. Unfortunately, Jim Pelletier couldn't make it for today's recording, but that's okay. We'll soldier on without him. This is the show featuring the latest news and trends over the last week, featuring Octopus Deploy as well as technologies related tangentially to Octopus Deploy as well. And so let's go ahead and get started with some of the news items that we saw during the week. This is an article that was written by Kit. He's a member of our product management team, and it's entitled A Beginner's Guide to Containers. Kit is a PM focusing on our deployment strategies relative to Kubernetes, which includes containers, obviously. And so Kit has written this blog post in case you aren't aware of what containers are and how they work. This is a good overview article of how you should think about containers, why they're they don't go into the past of containers, but they do certainly focus on the reasoning behind containers and what they are. They do differ, as he rightly points out, from virtual machines. And obviously, where this fits in line with technologies like Docker and Kubernetes. So, the way that I like to think of Kubernetes is that, that I like to think of containers. I should get my terminology right. Containers are exactly that. You think of about a container that you put on a transport ship. It contains a lot of stuff. So it can contain anything from code to config files to libraries to dependencies. All of those things you can put into basically a very lightweight sort of container, for lack of a better term, a box, if you will. And then you can run them in a variety of environments. They originate from the Linux operating system, but they are used in a variety of different ways, including through Docker and Kubernetes. So Docker is a great way of basically servicing these containers as images, which are basically a way of representing those containers, and then making them available as part of a runtime experience on, say, a desktop. Kubernetes is obviously an orchestration engine that was built by Google, and it provides all kinds of services around bringing those and scaling those containers relative to an application deployment scenario. So if you're looking for a primer on what containers are and kind of how they differ from VMs, this article from Kit should help a great deal. Staying with Kit, he's been a busy boy, so he's been writing a lot. He also talks a little bit about containers in this article entitled Choosing a Container Platform. So in addition to understanding what containers are and how they work, it's important to understand that there are a variety of container platforms out there. So there are platforms that are available for hosting these things. So if you're doing so in a Kubernetes-like environment, there's a variety of SKUs of Kubernetes. This is like K3S, which is a very light and easy to install installation of distribution of Kubernetes. So that's something that you can take advantage of. Docker and Docker Storm, Docker was mentioned earlier. Docker Storm is basically an orchestration tool around Docker. Sorry, not Storm, Swarm. What am I saying? Storm. Swarm is the tool that is available as part of Docker, and it's actually integrated within the experience itself. There's facilities like Nomad, which is from HashiCorp. It's not as popular, obviously, as Kubernetes. And then in addition to that, there's obviously, if you're doing to large scale systems, there's Kubernetes as well. If you're looking to do this within the cloud, there's a variety of services there, whether these are repository or registries for containers, whether these are hosted solutions for Kubernetes, for example. There's a variety of solutions available there. These include AKS, EKS, GKE. I talked about a number of these in a recent episode of Inside DevOps, where I interviewed Michael Levon, who talked a great deal about these things and talked a little bit about, your options there in terms of cloud, in terms of what you can do. And so if you want, you can go and check out this interview that I did with Michael, where he and I talked about Kubernetes and talked about the state of Kubernetes relative to that. So it's something that's complementary to this article here by Kit. And so if you're at all interested and you're wanting to find out more, these two articles would serve really, really nicely as part of a learning foundation around containers. And obviously, as we're building this stuff out and as we're moving towards providing services around this relative to Octopus Deploy, these articles will help you out in your learning journey, which is great. Building a robust CI/CD pipeline with Docker. So there's a bit of intention here where I've been picking these articles. This one was really popular on Dev2, and I had my reasons for picking this one out. I mean, if you're utilizing Docker today, that's great. Like Docker is a wonderful tool for leveraging containers and building out images and leveraging those as part of a pipeline for your CI/CD processes. And so this is an article that was written and published at Dev2 that talks about utilizing Docker at its most effective basis. And so it's outlined in the following areas. So introduction, why use Docker, CI/CD pipelines, setting up your environments, building an image for your application, using the compose command, build and compose, etc. And we'll talk about compose in a second. So there's a variety of commands that you can run through the Docker CLI. Build is one, compose is another. Integration of Docker in your CI/CD pipeline, scaling your pipeline with Docker, and then monitoring your pipeline. And so it goes into detail. If you're at all curious as to how you might go about doing this is a very comprehensive guide that lists all the things that you can do. So obviously, make sure you download and install Docker. It's sort of like a how-to guide. Creating the image itself, making sure that you expose the right environment variables, setting up the right ports, installing the right dependencies, etc. Establishing a compose file. So this is a YAML document that you will use to describe what your container will look like, including all the various properties that go into it. So as an example, here's one for a Node application where we map ports, etc. And then integrating that into a pipeline. Now, one of the reasons that I found this article interesting was that there was very little mention, if not no mention, of Dagger. So Dagger is a solution that I actually quite like quite a bit, and it's actually from the folks who built Docker. So Dagger is a way of building out these portable pipelines and doing so utilizing Docker as the underlying engine for this, so that you have you have this notion of a portable pipeline for this. There's no mention of that in this article, which I thought was a miss, but it does underpin the foundations of why you might want to use a technology like Docker and containers relative to your pipelines. So talks a little bit about what your pipeline configuration may look like in the context of GitHub Actions, making sure to use secrets, very, very important. So utilizing your secrets. And the great thing here is that if these are open or public repos, you're not chewing through minutes. So you can run these things. These results are cached. So when you're pulling down containers, images from remote registries, those are cached, and then you go ahead and build those out. And then as part of your deployment, you can go ahead and issue those to a Kubernetes cluster, for example. There's lots of different options that you have available there. Obviously, talking about how you scale and monitor subsequently is also important. I would have liked to have seen a mention of Dagger in this article because I think it's important. Unfortunately, that was a bit of a miss in my view. But these and other tools obviously speak to the fact that there's lots and lots of capability there. And so if you're looking to build out a CI/CD pipeline that leverages a technology for virtualization, or rather containerization, I'm getting my terms mixed up now, like Docker, that is something you can check out. This is an article we're checking out there on Dev2. This is an article from the Grafana folks, Observability Overload, Insights into the Rise of Tools, Data Sources, and Environments in Use Today. So this is an article from Trevor Jones, and Trevor is basically picking up some parts of their recent observability survey that they published. So the observability survey for 2023 was published, where they surveyed a bunch of folks who were utilizing Grafana and asked them a bunch of questions about, how are you using it? Are there tools that you are interested in, et cetera, et cetera. And so this is a blog post that goes into sort of like, there's a lot of overload that is encompassed when doing observability of applications in production, in test, et cetera. And the reality is that you're going to use a lot of different tools for the job. And so here, Trevor goes into detail about how, 68% of those surveyed have at least 4 data sources configured in Grafana, which is a lot. So you're observing things like databases, app servers, load balancers, probably, I would imagine, web service endpoints, microservices. You're probably doing some observability on the front end as well. So there's lots and lots of different data points to consider. In addition to that, there's all the stuff that goes into it. What we typically as the 3 horsemen of observability, which are metrics, logs, and traces. And you'll see these commonly referred to all the time when thinking about observability. So this telemetry data comes in a variety of shapes and sizes. And as you can see here, there's a summary here of all the tools that or technologies that are used by the various members who were surveyed. And you can see Grafana is obviously up there, Prometheus, the common ones that you would expect that are there: Splunk, Thanos, Datadog, Jaeger, New Relic. The common ones that you would expect are there. And so there's a lot of different tools out there. So how do you manage all that? How do you get a sense of what's there, and how can you take advantage of that? And that's basically what this blog post goes into, is that as you build and deploy out these services, it can be you can create a problem on your hands, which is how do you actually manage all that observability that's going on. So Grafana's approach here is obviously the big tent philosophy, which is we accept the fact that there's going to be more than one tool for the job, and so I think that wherever those sources are, we have to support them, which I think is the right approach for any type of SaaS. This is an article from Jesse Houghton entitled "Git Tooling Preview Features to Enhance Productivity." This is a new feature available in Visual Studio version 17.6 Preview 2, where they talked about some of the new things focusing around Git, which is obviously a central sort of usage point for a lot of developers out there using Git day in, day out. And so they're talking about things like enhancing the merge experience, which I think, to be honest, there's not much you can do here. Merging is always a tough problem. And I think for those of us who have gone through the merge, the sort of chaos of merging commits, know what I'm talking about there, especially if there's a lot of conflicts. Improving search for related issues and Azure DevOps work items, which is great. Staging and commit during build. So obviously being able to incorporate certain operations and exposing them out through the VS experience is going to be important. There's a video here showing the Git log of utilizing Roslyn. So hopefully this shows up so you can go ahead and say view history. And this is obviously a performance improvement here. So you can see we're getting a faster trace into the logs that are available there. And so you can see the comparison of the old versus the new. New branch and tag naming enhancements. So improvements to the way in which we can create branches, as an example, et cetera, et cetera. So there's lots and lots of stuff there that you can go and check out. And that's all available now as part of VS 17.6 Preview 2. This is another feature that I thought was interesting. This was a blog post that was published a couple days ago from the folks at Docker. So Docker Compose, which I mentioned earlier, it's a very commonly used command. Build and compose are the sort of dual commands that you'll use for constructing containers via the Docker CLI. And so one of the things that they've observed by observing customers using Docker is that people are often wanting to recompose containers quickly and rebuild images very quickly. And so utilizing this command, this Docker Compose command, they say that, this is obvious, Compose is an indispensable development tool. Running Docker Compose up often offers streamlined experience and scales from quickly standing up a Postgres database, et cetera, et cetera. And then they talk about, however, and this is where it kind of comes into the fact that when you want to make quick changes and you want to see those changes propagate, what would be really nice is if there was an evolution of command for Compose where they can do a new development specific configuration for the Compose YAML, as well as an experimental file watch command. So you can see here as an example, typical sort of React app, probably hello React, etc. And you can see the user drags and drops a new image here for the logo, replaces the React logo here with the Docker logo. And that's all triggering via the watch command, which you can see, which is running here. So we have Docker Compose up --wait and Docker Compose alpha watch. And so the watch command is basically watching for changes on the file system. And when that occurs, this will allow you to propagate those changes through to your running container, which is awesome. There are new sections. Xdevelop, this is a very common practice you'll see when adding extensions. So Xdevelop is a new extension for the YAML description, and this will allow you to specify the various places that you want to watch on the file system for those events that are being triggered. So in context of what we've discussed in this show so far relative to Kubernetes, Docker, containers, etc., I thought this would be a good article to mention. Switching gears over to GitHub. GitHub has been mightily busy over the past few weeks slash days. This is a new feature that they've recently added, announcing GitHub Actions deployment protection rules now in public beta. So, what is this? Well, protection rules are a very well established feature inside of GitHub, and what it allows you to do is establish certain things that you want to occur for certain branches. And deployment protection rules are no different. Basically, what they allow you to do is basically establish this idea of, hey, I want to be able to check whether or not I'm allowed to do a deployment, for example. And um, so in context of this, or in light of this new feature, what you can do now as part of your protection rule listing is you can say you can integrate with some of the third party providers that GitHub is synced with. So you can specify whether or not certain hours are met, for example, but they have partner implementations for their deployment rules beta. They have partnered with Datadog, Honeycomb, New Relic, NodeSource, Sentry, and ServiceNow. And this makes sense, right? Because when you're utilizing technologies that have an element of observability or approvals, etc., such as with ServiceNow, we have integration with ServiceNow that does exactly that. This is going to be pretty important. So this is pretty big. I mean, obviously, you want to make sure that you're not doing deployments out of band or without approval first. And so protection rules will allow you to basically make sure that you're part of it's kind of like a gate here for your deployments, and you'll be able to basically wait for them to be deployed or have them approved as part of that process. So protection rules there. This is just adding to that list of protection rules, and there's tons and tons of protection rules that you can invoke on various branches within a GitHub repo. If you haven't taken a look at what's available for protection rules, I would encourage you to do so. You'll see them under the settings for your repo, and there's a whole swath and list of protection rules that you can turn on and off. Most of them are disabled. I don't know why, but a lot of people turn them off or don't use them at all. You have to opt in, obviously, but these are just another set of rules that you can now use as part of GitHub, which is great. This one I thought was interesting as well. So this one kind of flew under the radar, but this was announced just recently. Enhancements for admins bypassing branch protections on github.com. So the reason why I laugh is because we encountered this one ourselves a number of times which internally on our team. So we enforce RBAC on a variety of repos. So we need to have admin approval for certain PRs. We need to make sure that PRs have at least one reviewer. And sometimes those branch protections can get in the way. So for example, a good example might be, let's say you have a set of integration tests that you must run in order to merge into main. But as part of those integration tests, you're utilizing secrets potentially. Like an integration test requires sometimes secrets to connect to databases, etc. And so, if a person submits a forked PR, they're not going to be able to do or execute those runs, and GitHub will just kind of shrug its shoulders and say, "I can't run this because forks don't have access to secrets." And so that can put you in a bit of a bind, especially when approving PRs. And so what this allows you to do is basically bypass essentially those branch protections that are sometimes tough to get around, like make sure integration tests always pass. Oftentimes what we may have, early days, we would have to bypass it by just simply disabling it, checking yes, approve, and then re-enabling it. And so this is essentially that. It's basically a bypass set of permissions that you can allocate, which is nice. And so you can see an example here where if you're committing changes, you can commit directly to main by bypassing some of those rules. And that's what this option here provides. And so you're opting into that as part of that. But I think this is a nice evolution of a pretty common model you'll see with organizations who use protection rules and in combination with GitHub. And this is sometimes more often than not, it works. Like it works well and people are fine with it, but sometimes it doesn't work well and you're just frustrated by it and you're like, just get out of the way. Let me do my job. And I understand the motivations for folks wanting to enforce this all the time, but sometimes, like if you're evolving your workflow or you're running certain edge case tests, etc., you just want to get it in. Sometimes those things turn out to be pretty important. So this is a nice little feature I thought to include inside of today's Deploy on Friday. Kubernetes 1.27 has shipped, and there is a lot written about this. If you want, you can go check out the high-level blog posts about this. But as you can see on the left-hand side here, there's a variety of sub-articles that have been written. So there's a lot that's gone into this. This is the first public release that the Kubernetes team has shipped for 2023. And so some of the things that are worth mentioning, obviously, they're freezing the image registry for K8s. That is because they're switching that to registry.kas.io. This has been broadcast on the Kubernetes website for like ever. There's been a big red bar across the top of Kubernetes.io's website. So this is obviously a transition period, and so they're freezing the image registry. They had to do this out of necessity. It's well documented, etc. But that's a change that's gone through. SecComp default. This is a set of rules that have been, or part of a series of SecComp profiling rules. So SecComp default is a security feature in Kubernetes that basically allows you to set a default profile for the SecComp profile for all containers in a pod. So SecComp is short for secure computing mode, and it's a feature in the Linux kernel that restricts system calls that a process can make. And so there are a variety of options that you can specify in Kubernetes, and those include things like it's unconfined, it's the default for the runtime, localhost only, etc., etc. And so this is now available as a stable. It's been added to the stable branch as part of the Kubernetes development, and so you can utilize that as part of Kubernetes 1.27, which is awesome. There's a bunch of other features that are been evolved to GA or have gone to beta. I won't bore you by going through all of them, but just be aware that 1.27 is now available. It will be anyone's guess as to when this will be upgraded with the various cloud providers, but I would assume it'd be very soon. So go and check out the blog posts if you haven't done so already. And as a reminder, there's a variety of sub articles that have been written that go into deep detail about each of the specific features. So, talking about, pod topology, spread policies, rev reach beta, etc. These are features that have gone into 1.27. You can read into those individually if you wish as well. Sticking with the theme of Kubernetes, this is an article that expands on the announcement that the .NET team made recently. So rootless or non-root Linux containers have been the most requested feature in the .NET container team. And so Richard Lander blogged about this recently, and this is an evolution of that story. So running non-root .NET containers with Kubernetes. So we recently announced that all .NET 8 container images will be configurable as non-root, which means, a less privileged account with a single line of code. This change is a welcome improvement in our security posture. In the last post, I promised to follow up on how to approach non-root hosting with Kubernetes. That's what we cover today. So if you're interested in taking this approach with Kubernetes, this is an article from Richard that talks about this. So there's an option here for a variety of settings that you can specify, the impacts of those changes, et cetera, et cetera. So essentially what this means is that there's now a user, a non-root user, that will be configured as part of your container that .NET will run under by default. And this is basically how you set this up as part of your Kubernetes profile. So definitely worth checking out. Sticking with other announcements, Node 20 is now available. So Node is the runtime available for hosting JavaScript applications inside of that utilizes the V8 engine from Chrome and is used in a whole host of applications. It's used pretty much everywhere. And so Node is this environment, this runtime environment that basically provides services to code. And so Node 20 is now available. The most notable one is they're now experimenting with a permission model, which is very interesting. For a long time, I think it could be said that Node has not had the best of flags available, etc., for restricting this down. For those folks who come from, say, a .NET world, this is similar to what you might see with CAS or other types of security models that are available through .NET, for example. A lot of different policy-based approaches apply to the same model. So here, what they're adding are new flags. So these are, restrict access to the file system, or restrict access to child process, or restrict access to worker threads. These are common sort of things you want to lock down because obviously allowing processes to just run willy-nilly on the file system may not be a good thing, for example. So these are new flags or features that are exposed that you can now leverage as part of the runtime environment for Node, which is fantastic. So when starting Node.js with dash dash experimental dash permission, the ability to access file system, spawn processes, and use worker threads will be restricted. So this is a opt-in parameter, but going forward, it will allow you to specify these. And this really will help actually, I think, in terms of evolving the model around executing general in code in general. So I think this is a good thing. And the way that Node typically evolves is that they'll introduce these as experimental features, and then eventually they'll just become part of the general feature set. So Node 20 adds the most notable change, the permission model. Custom ESM loader hooks nearing stable. So this is some work that's been undergoing. You can see they have an experimental loader flag here, or sorry, feature, and that's what allow you to specify the loader that you want to use for ESM or ES modules rather. So that's available there, and there's hooks that you can trigger off of that. Obviously, upgrading to V8, which is the underlying engine for Node itself. They're upgrading that to 11.3, and then stable test runner. Recent update to Node version 20 includes an important change to the test runner module. The module has been marked as stable as to a recent update. So some general nice features around security and performance. And so if you're at all interested, you can upgrade via npm and check it out. So definitely worth looking at. Our friends over at JetBrains have been working consistently on their IDEs and tools. I'm a fan. GoLand is a very popular IDE for Go-based development, and they recently posted an update in featuring their roadmap for the 2023.2 release. So they in April shipped 2023.1, and now they're announcing their roadmap for 2023.2. So you can see here they introduced a bunch of stuff in 2023.1, including a vulnerability checker, better navigation of gRPC code, and the rename refactoring, et cetera, et cetera. So there's lots and lots of stuff there. And then the roadmap itself has been announced as part of 2023.2. So definitely go and check that out. If you're at all interested, it's a great IDE. I would also encourage you to check out VS Code, obviously. VS Code and GoLand, I think, are my 1-2 options for doing Go development. Both wonderful tools, and really encouraged by what's coming down the pipe from JetBrains, which is awesome. So that's about it. Short and sweet, which I know is what most folks like these days, which is great. Unfortunately, Jim couldn't make it for today's recording, but again, he sends his best. If you happen to stumble upon this video and are interested in the content that we're showing you, please feel free to subscribe or like this video. And if there's anything that you see that hits your radar that you would like Jim and I to discuss over the next weeks, etc., feel free to send us a comment in the underlying description for this video, and we'd be happy to cover it. Until then, we'll see you next week on the next edition of Deploy on Friday. Take care.